Hawaii was once ruled by an infamous royal family who took things to the extreme when it came to keeping their bloodline pure. Throughout history, there have been many cases of famous families marrying within their bloodline. But the most shocking fact about Hawaiian royalty is that they even married their full siblings. You might be thinking, who would want to marry their brother or sister? Well, this all comes down to what the royal family was trying to preserve. When we think of Hawaii, we imagine a beautiful tropical paradise with white sand beaches and crystal clear water. But did you know that Hawaii wasn't always a peaceful and relaxing place? In fact, during the 18th century, Hawaii was a battlefield where rival chiefs were constantly fighting for power. It was a time of great turmoil and violence, and the only way for a chief to secure their power was to form alliances with other powerful families. But there was a problem. Most of these families were too closely related to marry, so the chiefs had to come up with another solution. This is where the practice of sibling marriage began. Hawaiian chiefs started marrying their full sisters in order to keep their bloodline pure and prevent any rival chiefs from taking over their kingdom. Now you might be wondering, why not just marry cousins or other distant relatives instead of your own siblings? Well, it turns out that the Hawaiian chiefs were so paranoid about losing their power that they didn't even trust marrying outside of their immediate family. They believed that if they married someone who was too distantly related, there was a chance that their rival could manipulate them into giving up some of their power or even overthrowing them altogether. The only way they could be sure that their bloodline would remain pure was to marry their full siblings. Now let's talk about how common this practice was. I mean, if it was a rare occurrence, you could argue that it was simply a product of the times. But that's not the case here. Marrying one's sibling was so common among Hawaiian nobility that it became known as the institution of pio. The word pio comes from the Hawaiian language and means both brother and sister. So when two siblings married, they were said to be entering into a pio union. This practice was not only accepted, but encouraged by Hawaiian society. In fact, it was seen as a duty for the royals to keep their bloodline pure through sibling marriage. And as you can imagine, this led to some pretty interesting dynamics within the royal family. Just imagine the awkward family gatherings. Now, I'm not saying that all Hawaiian royals were happy with this situation, but they felt it was necessary to keep their power. After all, no one wants to be overthrown by their rivals, especially when they're holding on to a luxurious lifestyle. But it gets even more complicated than that. Not all Hawaiian royals were okay with marrying their siblings. Some of them actually tried to fight against it. For example, there was a royal couple named Liliuokalani and her husband, Archibald Scott Lunalilo. They were second cousins, but they didn't want to marry each other because they were concerned about the health of their future children. At the time, there was a belief that marrying close relatives could lead to genetic problems in the offspring. So, Liliuokalani and Lunalilo decided to go against tradition and marry someone outside of their family. However, their attempt to break away from the tradition was unsuccessful, and their son tragically died at a young age, fueling the belief that sibling marriage was necessary to preserve the royal bloodline. But it wasn't just the fear of losing power and the belief in preserving the royal bloodline that led to the practice of sibling marriage in Hawaii. There was another reason, one that might sound a little strange, but was very important to the Hawaiians at the time. Marrying your sibling may seem like a taboo subject today, but back then it was a way to ensure that your family's wealth and power stayed within the family. This may sound selfish, but it was a common practice in many cultures around the world, not just in Hawaii. But in Hawaii, it was taken to a whole new level. The Hawaiian nobility believed that their bloodline was sacred and that marrying outside of the family would contaminate it. This may sound crazy, but remember that they were living in a time when there was a lot of competition for power and resources. By marrying their siblings, they ensured that their wealth and power would stay within the family and that no one could take it away from them. It may seem like a small comfort in a world where power struggles were a constant threat, but for the Hawaiian nobility, it was a way to hold on to the only thing that mattered to them, their way of life. Another reason for this practice was the lack of record keeping. In Hawaii, there wasn't a system to keep track of who was related to whom, which made it difficult to find someone outside of the family to marry. Additionally, there was a high rate of illegitimacy, which meant that many people didn't know who their real parents were, making it even more complicated to find someone to marry outside of the family. This lack of records and the high rate of illegitimacy led to a situation where marrying your sibling was seen as the only option for the Hawaiian nobility. The practice of sibling marriage continued in Hawaii until the monarchy was overthrown in 1893. At this point, it had become deeply ingrained in Hawaiian culture and was seen as a necessary evil to preserve the royal bloodline. When the monarchy was overthrown, however, the practice of sibling marriage came to an end. Now, while this might seem like a dark and disturbing chapter in history, it's important to remember that it was a product of its time. The Hawaiian nobility were living in a world where power struggles and rivalries were a constant threat, and they believed that marrying their siblings was the best way to protect their way of life. While we may look back on this practice now and shake our heads in disbelief, it's important to remember that different cultures have different traditions and beliefs. And what may seem strange to us now may have been commonplace in another time and place. It's also worth noting that the Hawaiian monarchy was not the only group of people who practiced sibling marriage. In fact, it was a common practice in many cultures around the world, often for similar reasons. For example, in ancient Egypt, it was common for pharaohs to marry their siblings in order to keep the pharaonic bloodline pure. Similarly, in ancient Mesopotamia, sibling marriage was used as a way to maintain the power and status of the royal family. While the practice of sibling marriage may seem strange to us now, it's important to remember that it was a product of the times in which it occurred. The Hawaiian nobility were simply trying to protect their way of life in a world where power struggles and rivalries were a constant threat. And while we may look back on this practice now and shake our heads in disbelief, it's important to remember that different cultures have different traditions and beliefs, and what may seem strange to us now may have been commonplace in another time and place. All right. Now it's time for a quick break. But before you go, please make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps me out. And if you've watched until now, I really appreciate it. Now let's get back to the video. Now that you know why Hawaiian marry their sibling, let's move on to another fascinating topic. Speaking of marriage, did you know that in some countries it's legal to marry your cousin? That's right. In some places around the world, marrying your cousin is a common practice. But why is it legal in some countries and illegal in others? What are the cultural and historical factors that influence the legality of cousin marriage? And what are the potential risks and benefits of marrying someone you're closely related to? Join me as we explore the complex world of cousin marriage and discover the surprising places where it's legal. We'll delve into the history of this controversial practice and examine the social and genetic implications. So grab a cup of coffee and get ready to be surprised by the unexpected places where you can say, "I do" to your cousin.